If you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself. So obviously what you're doing currently and for your day job, but also obviously like a lot of us, you're also practicing in your field. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your history and what sort of interests you about the world that you circulate in.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Indonesia and I grew up in Indonesia until I think I moved to Australia when I was 20. And I have always been interested in storytelling. When I was 7, I made my own puppet because I was really curious about what it means to tell stories with, tools. And at the time, the puppets were my media, but then when I was in 1996 and 1997, there was big reformation movements in Indonesia, where the former dictator Suharto lost his power, and I became quite interested in politics and how to tell stories about what was happening around me. Basically, I wanted to understand what was going on around me, and I met a journalist who basically said, "Well, be a journalist then." And then so yeah, I became a journalist, and then I moved to Australia. I worked for the ABC for close to 10 years. And now I'm teaching in RMIT in the journalism program. But yeah, as you said, I'm still a practicing journalist. I still write for Crikey. I've written for The Guardian. But yeah, I think, and also I'm doing my PhD in digital storytelling and YouTube in Indonesia.
So when you're at the ABC for a long time, what sort of stuff were you working on there?
Um, I was working for Radio Australia, which is the kind of the international wing of the ABC. So it's like BBC World. BBC has BBC World. The ABC has Radio Australia, and I was doing mostly stories about Indonesia, Southeast Asian politics, including a lot of climate stories as well, about especially anything to do with Indonesia. And yeah, I used to also work for programs like Connect Asia and Asia Pacific, which still exists now. Yeah, reporting mostly about Southeast Asian politics and culture.
Yeah, cool. I guess if you had to do sort of the open day pitch, why should students maybe choose journalism? How does it differ, do you think, from maybe some of the other media disciplines that we have in the school or that they might find at other universities?
Yeah, well, I think one of my, most, I really believe that good journalism is very important in the world today. And I have other passions. I love creative writing. I love theater. I love other forms of storytelling. But I still really deeply believe that what journalism can offer in the world today is um, helping people navigate this super complex world, where the public is fragmented. People want guidance. People want to be connected to the wider world, and we see the way people do this is by finding people that they agree with, which is normal. But I think what we can do with journalism is, okay, you find your people, but let's have a space and some tools that we can use to not only check your own beliefs, but also the beliefs that other people have. That yeah, so for example, at the moment we have all these protests happening in Canberra, in Canada, etc. What I see there is, people who, they find their tribe, and which is, I mean, I don't like to use that word tribe, but this is what people want, to be connected with people they agree with. And journalism is a set of tools, I think, that can help people to check their own biases and check the biases of other people as well with facts.
Yeah, great. I guess just moving on to maybe something a bit more connected to the subject that we're in at the moment, which is communicating the environment.
Mm-hmm.
This I know is something that you've done a little bit of work in terms of environmental communication, environmental journalism.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues maybe that you've worked on or reported on in this area, through your career?
Yeah, I think one of the stories that I did in Indonesia was about the story of, oh, I can't remember the name now. It's basically a story about how basically a town was there was some drilling projects by a mining company that were just trying to find resources there, and the drill hit the wrong spot basically, and because of that, mud came out from that drilling spot, and basically a whole town was flooded and up to like the roof level. So basically that town disappeared now. And that was a huge thing. And I think a big part of that is, the way we think about the world, the way we think about, people's connection with places. I had to explore all these things about, what does that mean when we lose the place we live in, because of this thing that, we do in our world, which is, to find this resource to sell and etc. So that was one of the biggest stories that I worked on. But also, I think, climate change was just one of those things that you have to do as a journalist because it's a big issue that we face in the world. So I did little stories here and there as well. And I can tell you that one of the biggest challenges as a journalist working, talking about climate change is, because as a journalist, you need to see the other side, right? What other people are talking about. And at the ABC, for example, because the ABC was criticized a lot by being lefty, there was a lot of, there were times when I had to interview climate skeptics, even though, I didn't see the point of interviewing climate skeptics, but because we had to look at things from different points of view. So that was one of the biggest challenges, I think, at the ABC that I felt. One of the reasons why I became interested in journalism was because as someone from a country that was colonized by the Dutch for more than 350 years, and then the Japanese came, and there was a moment there with the French as well. I always felt so disconnected from the world around me because I read a lot of traditional stories. I read a lot of folk stories, Indonesian and Javanese folk stories. I also read, I also grew up with Japanese and American films and anime and those kind of things. But then I remember being curious about, but how am I connected to all the stories around me, the pop culture around me. And this is, I think, the big puzzle that I'm still trying to figure out. But I think there's something about journalism that is helping me to do that, basically to try to find, okay, how am I connected to the world, basically? And if we're talking about the function of journalism, obviously there's the fact checking and verifying. Journalism is a discipline of verification, basically, if you use an old definition of journalism. But then there's the storytelling part of journalism. And I think that second part is a very, very interesting thing when you think about the environment in general and how stories, when we try to connect ourselves with the world around us, the best way to do that is through stories and storytelling. And I think journalism is one tradition in that, in that big question of how do we connect ourselves with the world? And especially these days, the world is so complex, cosmopolitan, global, and we need new storytelling tools to be able to make sense who we are in connection with the world around us.
Yeah, great. That sort of dovetails really neatly into the next question, which may have some overlap, which is about how, in the past, how has, or in the future, how might journalism persuade people? You spoke about it helping you sort of situate yourself within community, within the planet, if you like, if we're looking at climate on a global scale, environmental issues on a global scale. But as a practicing journalist and as a kind of storytelling journalist in that sense, what are some of the tools, or can you think of any examples of where you've tried or other people have tried to persuade people, to see things from their point of view?
I think two projects that I have used in my teaching as examples are a project by the BBC called Life at 50, which basically is a project looking at what is life like in places where it's normal to see 50 degrees Celsius. And also the other one is, I think it's the New York Times and ProPublica, looking at the Great Climate Migration, basically looking at, okay, who are the people who will be the most impacted by climate change, and where will they be moving? And it's an amazing project. So both are amazing projects, but I think both look at the story of climate change and the environment from two very different points of view. So the first one, Life at 50, is basically interviewing people, or everyday people, a mother living in Kuwait, and or I think there was this guy who lives in Canada during the bushfire, and it's the power of that project is by connecting us with all these people, a human being. And that's an important tool in the journalism tool set, right? When we look at a big issue, we look at, okay, what is the human face here? How can we find the human voice that can help you understand what it's like to live in this place that is so different to the place that I live in. So that project, Life at 50, talks about, it's an example of the human voices in the story of climate change. But then the Great Climate Migration, which is the New York Times story, and ProPublica, it's a collaboration between the two. It's looking at data, big data, looking at the numbers, looking at what the world will look like. There's also the human voices in that story, but it's basically giving us a sense of, okay, this is what the world will look like. And I think those two projects maybe really are good examples to look at how journalism plays a role in talking about the stories of climate change, through the human voices, but also through big data.